Hi, everyone. I hope you've had a chance to relax this summer. I just want to share some information with you from the learning committee that I participated in this summer. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as we prepare to come back together with students this fall, and so that we can use our in-service time to get the learning materials ready based on the current model that we are in. So during the 2020-21 school year, we have a variety of learning models that we could be in based on the status of where our state is in regard to opening up. So currently we are opening schools at step 2, and we are opening in the hybrid model. But we also know that that could change depending on any outbreaks in the state, whether we end up going fully remote at any point in the year, or we're able to potentially go back to fully in person during the year. So there are 3 models that you'll hear me refer to in this presentation. One is remote. That is when all students are home. That's what it was like in the spring. The hybrid model is how we're starting the school year, with a partial in-person, partial remote schedule where students will have 2 days in person and 3 days remote. We're following an AACBB rotation, with that C day for teachers to collaborate, to plan, and prepare the work needed for the following week. And then the final option is virtual. That was an option students could choose to remain virtual all 5 days of the school week. At the high school, there will be an outside organization supporting students. And at the K-8 level, there will be a group of CSD teachers that support students working from home. So I guess what's important to note there is that if you're a K-8 teacher that is planning to come into the school building, you will not also be supporting students who are working fully virtually. So just to share the learning committee's process, we started a few weeks ago by sharing what worked and didn't work in the spring. We wanted to focus on the remote model first because it was the one we were most familiar with. We recognized that families felt we put in a lot of effort, but they weren't fully satisfied with the amount of learning that happened in the spring. Teachers really weren't either. And we also quickly recognized that the Agency of Ed guidelines were requiring more accountability for students during the remote learning phase. So then we looked at survey results from parents and caregivers who completed it in both April and June. We also looked at the teacher survey that was pushed out from the CEA. And once again, we focused on what worked, what didn't work, and what was most clear to us was that we needed more synchronous learning opportunities to ensure that students are making adequate progress throughout the school year. We started by formatting the plan for the remote learning model. So figuring out what expectations students, parents and caregivers, and teachers will have in a fully remote learning model. Then we talked about the hybrid learning model, which is definitely the most complicated to navigate because students are in school some days, at home some days, but teachers are teaching in-person students 4 out of the 5 days. So figuring out logistically how that will work while also aligning with the AOE guidelines was pretty tricky. But as I mentioned, we really focused on all 3 of the groups who would be impacted by this learning model. And once we gave our feedback, Gwen brought that feedback to the DLT. They restructured the document, came back to us, and it was a constant communication between all of us, trying to follow the AOE guidelines and coming up with a reasonable plan for students, caregivers, and teachers. So once we felt like we had our expectations set, we aligned the documents so that it was clear that we were consistent throughout the district, and there was some consistency knowing that we will potentially move in and out of these models throughout the school year, whether we're fully remote, hybrid, or fully in person. So we wanted to make sure that it was easy to see how expectations would shift in each of those models. Once we agreed on the district level expectations, we then worked in grade level clusters to figure out what it would look like at each of our buildings. So there was a K-2 group, Carrie, Kate, Amy, and I worked on the Mallets Bay grade level cluster worksheet. And then there was a middle school and a high school team as well. So there was a lot of teacher input throughout this whole process. Finally, and really the stage that we're all in right now is figuring out what do we now need to move forward now that we know the expectations and we have a plan. What do teachers need and what are families going to need as we move into this hybrid learning model, especially as we're starting the school year that way. One thing all of us need to remember is that we need to be flexible because things keep changing. Almost every time we had a meeting, there was a new guideline or mandate in between our meetings, and there was something that needed to change. And there's still potential for that between now and September 8th. If we're given new guidelines or recommendations, that means we need to consider them in our plans. And potentially it could make a change, or we might have already addressed that guideline. However, if we're given a new mandate, it must be followed, and there would definitely be a change to the plan to ensure that we are aligning with the Agency of Ed mandate. So I want to share with you the model that we will be following specifically during the hybrid learning environment. We're referring to it as a blended learning model. It's very similar to what we learned at in-service at the end of last school year with Ketlin Tucker. First, grade level teams are going to identify learning for a week. We need to be on the same page as a grade level in terms of what we are teaching, but we have a little bit more flexibility now in how we teach it, depending on teaching style. Each week on Wednesdays, you'll meet as a grade level team so that you can recalibrate to make sure that if you need more time on a certain content, you can add more time. We will be planning for a 5-day week. The lessons or the first instruction for each day will either be in person or online, depending on that's a student's schedule for that day. So, for example, if you're teaching a math lesson on telling time, there would be maybe a video or a recording from Learn Zillion or Khan Academy that pushes out on telling time to students who are working from home, and you would teach a similar lesson to your students in person. The focus during our in-person days is to meet with small groups. You're going to use your assessments to determine who needs what based on the information you're getting from those assessments to make sure that students are moving forward on the learning progression that you are working on for that week. We had talked a little bit about maybe students remoting into small groups. So if you're meeting with a small group on Monday that's focusing on subtraction and you have some students at home that would benefit from some reteaching on subtraction, could they remote in? We're not really sure of that yet because it's more of a tech question. So the benefit of having this type of blended learning model is that it's pretty easy to shift into a new mode of learning, whether we're in step 1, step 2, or step 3. So whether we're fully remote, hybrid, or all in person. If we continue to plan for a 5-day week, if on a Wednesday we find out that on Thursday we're going remote for a few weeks, you're not having to reshuffle and teach 2 different groups of students different content based on when they were in person and when they weren't. So we have some examples for you to look at so you can wrap your head around this a little bit, because I know right now when you first hear this, it probably sounds a little bit confusing. Teachers and teams are going to plan specific lessons for their students and post the assignments to Google Classroom. In the spring, we all had to have the exact same lessons pushed out. Now you have a little bit of flexibility, but remember, we'll have Wednesdays to work together, share resources. So we likely will be pretty well aligned here, but it still gives you the flexibility to meet your own class's needs based on where they are at and your own teaching style. So the big shift here is that the Agency of Education really upped the daily learning requirements for students. In the spring, we had to provide between 2 and 2.5 hours of instruction and assignments for students. Now in grades 3 to 5, we are expected to push out 5 hours worth of instruction daily. That does include unified arts, it includes all content areas, and it includes social emotional learning meetings. That's all part of the 5 hours, but obviously it's a lot more than what we were used to in the spring. And during the school day, we're still expected to meet that 5 hours of instruction, but we also recognize that we may lose some time based on the health screening, having snack, lots of cleaning up for snack and lunch. That there will also be some mass breaks in there. So, we're not going to be counting the minutes here, but we did need to provide a plan that would demonstrate 5 hours worth of instruction. So you may want to spend some time now just thinking about the information that I've already given you. In the next video, I am going to share some specific examples of the blended learning model, what your weekly learning plan would look like, and what it would look like to create a daily lesson plan that would include more than one way of accessing the content, whether a student's in-person learning from you or learning from a video from home.